that's the most interesting part for us, that now we want to discuss about something that I guess probably we noticed when we were going through the different COVID apps, or rather contact tracing applications, and that was there was this. Let me say, we kept on having these conversations around app architecture, app architecture, app architecture, app architecture. Why are they doing it this way, or what do you think you would do? And so I don't know. I felt like that's one of the things that probably we could talk about today, and that is just like rethinking Android app architecture. So I don't know what comes to mind for you when you think about architecture, but like for me, I would say it's more around the way you have an architect and you need to construct like a building. So then you need to have an architect, and the architect needs to think about what are the things that needs to come here. We need to plan it all with the materials and where everything is going to fall into place. And so that's what comes into mind when someone tells me, oh yeah, Android app architecture. And so I think about like the whole architecture bit, that someone needs to sit down and have sort of like a blueprint of what is going to go where. The sewer pipes are going to go to this side of the house. We are not going to put the kitchen. Okay, actually, funny story. I saw an advert of an apartment where the kitchen was next to the loo and the bathroom, and I was like, wait, why are they putting the kitchen next to the toilet and the bathroom? And they're like advertising it. So it was very interesting in that I was like, okay, wait, did they think about this architecture very well? And so these are some of the problems that probably you would have developers facing. So, but my question to you is, what comes to mind when you hear about
like? Hold on there, like, because there's something that I like that you just said, like what comes to your mind when you think about Android architecture, because I think a lot of the developers out there, when they think about architecture of Android, they think about MVVM or MVP. Like, there's two things that I heard about. What comes to mind for me is more like what you said. Yeah. It's like the building blocks that we need to create an app, right? What do we actually need, and where do we put it in place? And this is not so much about MVVM or MVP or whatever, because when you think about like the apps that we saw, I think they had some MVVM-ish thing sometimes there, but still we saw a lot of building blocks that were always the same. And I think these are the things that we probably should talk about today much more. And that's like that's quite much similar to like an normal architecture. You need a kitchen, you need a living room, like all of these things, and how we put them together.
And that's very interesting. Where we're sort of like we're tackling it from. It's not about because I've seen most of the developers think about, when we talk about Android app architecture, MV something. It's either an MV. Nowadays I call it MV something because it's either an MVVM, MVVI, or MVI, or there's so many of them, and I feel like nowadays they're popping up every other place. And I think depending on probably the company or the group of developers that you jump on a project with, they will also have their own way of looking at it. And so I like what you said. It's like what are these components that are key? And then it's my work for me to think about, okay, so what is the platform that I want to, what is the architecture, or what is the model, or what is the way in which I want to construct my application? Do I now want to adopt this specific one or a different one? So
also the thing is, like, right, also maybe something like they're just focusing on one part. Like, there's a word view in there, that's the view, right? And they're all focusing how do we connect something to the view, but there's so much more in an app, and that's completely open. And I think this is the thing that you should think about more than just like, what is your MV something? As you said, like, you come to a company and they will have probably something different in MVVM. And SoundCloud, we have something called Uniflow, which is a mix of both MVVM and MVP, but it's just the building blocks that we have, right? And you have to adapt.
And so one of the most important things is the separation of like concerns in a way within the Android application itself. And this is like something I've noticed with all of these ones, whether it's MVVI, name it, whatever pattern that people want to use to develop their apps, they go with different ones. So one of the things I've seen is everyone, or like, it's actually a best practice to separate the UI from, let me say, the logic bit, right?
This is a simple,
and I think the reason
nested, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So
that you get when you do this.
Yeah, exactly. So then you'd have your UI separated from your logic bit. But I guess the place where a lot of contention comes in is when you talk about how are you separating the logic. The UI everyone is in agreement with, and I don't think we can really explain further when it comes to UI, because it's like everyone agrees, yes, the UI should be separated. So this is a bit where it comes to the logic is where I think we saw different implementations in the Italian one, from the British one, from the German one. There were like different ways of implementing that logic. And I think you've even seen it when you're looking at your applications, also, when you're making applications, even at work in different places or different developers. So here's my question. I've seen developers using the business logic, and then there's the technical logic. Of these two, I don't know which of the two do you prefer? Which of the two which one of the two would you lean towards? Would you lean towards the business logic? Would you lean towards thinking about, let me split my app or the different categories, the business logic or the technical one?
Yeah, so yeah, the apps that we saw, right, it was a bit mixed. So you kind of saw both. It seems like a lot of developers favor the technical ones, where you see like, I know, UI, and there was HTTP application, which is a bit of both, right? I lean towards the business one, so I would call it more like feature, so a package by feature, because I want to open an app and I would want to understand what does this do. And then I would see for these apps, for example, there was an onboarding, and there's something about Bluetooth notification, right? And like these kind of things, maybe a help section. And this helps me understand, also helps me finding things. I don't know something is in an activity, on a fragment, on a service. So for someone who coming into an app, this really helps me, to be honest. How about you?
So I'd lean towards what you're saying. The trick that I've seen that happens, the most challenging thing that I've seen happening is when we get to this point of now that this other extra logical bits. Because yes, I do agree with you having and I also lean towards the business logic where if it's notifications, yes, have it on its own. Things that are everything that is going to talk about, let's say like a shopping cart, for instance, I'm going to put it separately and just break it down into very I guess those small packages inside and just say, hey, look, this package handles this feature, this package handles this other feature. The other bit maybe I can explain, I can also add on top of that, Danny, is when we talk about now the other extra features where I'd see most developers tending towards you being more technical is when it comes to things like now we have data. How are we going to play around with data? Now we have a layer, like when you have a data layer. So where do we throw that? So I have data that I need to handle. I want to handle, let's say if you're using Room, I want to handle like the person's preferences. Where do I put that? When I want to handle a list that I'm fetching from the database on offers, where do I put that? Do I separate that into different places? Or do I just have them into one big package where I just say this is the database or this is the data layer, stuff like that. So it starts to get very interesting at that point because I would lean maybe towards saying I'd probably have one central one. I'd write one like a function or an activity that is going to redirect and everyone can easily access it from that bit of this is the data layer. So then if I'm looking for everything to do with data, I would find it at one point and not scattered around everywhere. That's what I would do. I don't know what your preference would be when it comes to that specific area.
No, that's a really good point. And what we then see, even if like developers start with packaging by features, right? Then they have this big shared or common thing where all of these things live, right? And then all of a sudden, half your app sits in this shared thing. I think the way I would approach it is a little bit of both. So the individual packages, they shouldn't know that there is this one thing. So why should I care if this is one Room database or it's a Room database and a shared preferences, right? So what you probably should do is maybe have a little interface in each of them that just encapsulate the data that you need. And then in some point, you have like one repository or whatever your pattern is, right? That might implement multiple of them. So this way you're completely independent how you do it, and you can implement them separately, you can implement them one point. There's also, you can hide it all with dependency injection. And actually, like some people use this pattern called a use case. And this is actually what use cases are. It's something that you need for one specific thing, and it just has the methods that you need. You don't care about the user probably in the Bluetooth, incoming Bluetooth traffic, right? But they might be implemented by one thing, or the data source for all of these is maybe one thing, but you don't have to care as a user for this. So this is, I think, the way I would approach it. So there might be probably a shared module or something with your database module, but try to encapsulate it a little bit from your features.
Okay. So what happens when you have, how would you approach things like, so someone wants to handle, I think there was an application where they had a lot of, they had this logic on things that were doing calculations. I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's probably the Italian one. Yeah. And so let me give you an example. So I have something like, I'm rethinking that we're building something that looks like an Amazon, so like a shopping thing, right? I don't know why I've insisted on that. That's not a project I'm working on, definitely. so if you have this, you've already divided the UI, you already have this other, let me say, a shopping place, an offers package, all those things that handle all of them. And so I want something that now is going to interface and it's going to land, and this is like the first thing the user opens. This is like the main activity. And I think we saw, I think something that you're talking about where most developers now are leaning towards having the main activity, and then there's like a base activity on top of it, on top of the onboarding one. And so you'd have, when you go to the main activity, there's literally nothing there, but then it redirects you to go somewhere else that has like this landing page, and the landing page has things to do with offers and all those things. So in that case where you have these sort of areas that are not necessarily a full packaging in its sense, like it's not a shopping cart, it's not an offers page. I don't know, it starts to look very different in gray area. These other activities that are there, for instance, like in the contact tracing one, you remember we had an activity that was responsible for just sensing whether someone has gotten in contact with someone, and then it is able to notify either the Bluetooth activity and says Bluetooth activity, hey, you know what? Probably this is the best time that it calls the Bluetooth activity, and then it has to Bluetooth is on, it does a match and says, okay, this person is actually infected by COVID, for instance, and then I have to send a notification elsewhere. And so these sort of activities that are neither, they don't look business-like, but they are more technical. Would you go the route of saying, let me put all of these things in utils?
So if it's an Android activity, I think it should never be in a util package, because it's definitely not a util, right? Util is like, again, it's like one of these dumpster thing where we put all the things that we don't know where to put them, right? So definitely never do that. Like utils should be utilities, and there shouldn't be in your A code like an activity. So there's actually like, let's take it maybe a step back. I found it very interesting that all of these apps that we looked at use like a multi-activity approach, right?
Yeah.
Like, although from like, when you look at how Google says you should nowadays Android and architect Android app, we saw these things. We saw view models. We even saw sometimes coroutines. We saw live data. We saw repository patterns. So we saw navigation. So a lot of these things that Google said these are the things you should use to architect your app, we saw. But all of them, or most of them, use like multi-activities, which nowadays you should have one activity with a lot of fragments, right? I found it actually very interesting that all these apps, although they're pretty recent, use like a multi-activity approach. I don't know, but I think, yes, Bluetooth is a very technical term, but also, if let's say we have a Bluetooth activity, it still serves a purpose, something user-facing that is about Bluetooth. So then maybe put it in a Bluetooth package, right? I mean, always think from the user perspective. That's why I said notification could be like, is this now the technical term notification, or is it the user term notification, right? So it fits into both. And I think you have these categories, and I think it's only tricky if you have something that is maybe shared, and then you're starting to have this base activity thing, right, where you extract logic, and this is like really a dangerous place to go to, because in the end it becomes another dubstart file. So I don't think there's like a real right or wrong here. Like
we're going through it. Okay. And so
you could also think of maybe about what are the like the way how you navigate throughout your app could also be something you could lay out, right? So from the start, these are the features that the user can reach, and then it spreads from there. And maybe you can somehow build it in this way instead of having them all on top level or something, right? So just another thing to think about.
Okay, and so when it comes to now the whole debate on MVVM, MVI, MV this, MV that, is it something that you think? From my view, I'm always of the opinion of if it works, don't change it, just use it the way it is. So do you think it's good for someone to adopt something that is already being used, or coming up with our own architecture pattern depending on the use case of that specific application? Because I know there's something, the beauty, I think one of the things that made me fall in love with Android is the fact that it's this very, it's open source, yes. So many developers working and contributing to that whole shared knowledge on Android development. But at the same time, I think the thing that makes me happy is there are all these new ways of doing things and the better things of doing things. I mean, right now, Jetpack has come out. So I'm definitely expecting that after a couple of months or weeks, we are still going to have a very new, another person is going to pop up with another architecture pattern of how to use Jetpack, for instance. I mean, I'm expecting that to happen. So when it comes to the whole debate on MV something, MV this, MV that, let me ask a question that I know you probably might reject it and say, no, that is not the way. Is there a best? Is there a best one out of the MV somethings? Let us call them MV somethings. Is there a best one? Based on the ones that you've been using, maybe from your experience, which is the one that according to you, you found, okay, this is cool from your side?
I mean, as you said, it will probably reject this question because there isn't. Yeah. Let me go first, like how you started this, the conversation. You said like, is it worth changing, right? So let's assume you have something. You have an MVP app. Should you change it? What reason to change it? The first thought I would say is that comes to mind is no, because if it's working, why would you change it? So just because there's a new thing out there, right? This should not be a reason. A reason that would be valid for me, for example, would be you have an MVP app, but you have a lot of new developers coming in, and maybe the original ones are not there anymore. And all of these new developers, they know Jetpack, they know view model. So maybe this might be a reason, you know, like every single submission we get as a coding challenge, you all use MVVM. So they all seem to know this pattern. So maybe it makes sense to adapt new features of MVVM and see if this is a good approach. It's definitely not a reason to go to your product owner and say, hey, we will change the whole architecture of the app because Google told us so. But think about if you can slowly move the direction, because view model is a nice library, right? And it fits hard into this MVP pattern, right? Because kind of view model is a bit simpler, and then it gets confusing. But if you have a team and they're kind of constant, I wouldn't see a reason to change it. I remember a few years ago when this whole discussion started, I was at a conference and then someone was showing their pattern. It was, I think they called it MVCP because it was a mix of a lot of them. And I realized, wait, we are kind of using the same pattern. We didn't even give it a name. It was just the way that we architect the app in our company. And it was working for us. If it's working for you, there's no reason to change it, I'd say. But there might be reason because in the end, they all solve the same problem, like encapsulating logic, make it testable, and make it like refactorable in the end, and adaptable to change. But they also serve a communication purpose, right? Communicating to other developers. If they know you're using MVVM, they have a clear picture in their head, right? And that's the whole thing. That's why MVC, MVP, MVVM there. And in different areas, you will find different things that are working, right? So hence, I like I don't know, the last apps that I worked on, I liked data binding to the UI. Then there's a view model, and then there's an MVVM approach. But I also, in one company, we put a bit of it got inspired by Redux. So put like unidirectional data flow, which is also a thing that MVI, right? Like Redux, like we have a thing, as I said, called uniflow. So there's also these things that you can combine, right? Like how your data flows. And yeah.
Interesting.
I think it might change in the future, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting what you said, and probably it's like a very nice way to maybe us also think about like concluding this. Is more when you're choosing an architectural pattern for Android, is you need to think about the developers in your team, because those are the people who are going to be working on this like oftenly. And then the other thing that you need to also think about is, hey, if technology is changing, these are the new ways in which people are using the application, and this is where the technology is headed to. I think the best thing is us saying, look, maybe it's time for us to rethink about our architecture and change it there at that point in time. So yeah, I don't think I can add much, but just to emphasize that bit of it there. And I think for me, just in conclusion, is I think that the whole Android app development bit is more that architectural bit. I think it starts to also impact on several other packages maybe that you're going to use within the application. I think so. The other bit that I also think it starts to also impact on is also how are you guys thinking about the whole application, so then if you bring a new developer on board, how are you looking at them quickly adapting or picking up those technologies? So for instance, if I bring someone, we are hiring developers, for instance, right? And so I say we are looking for someone who is experienced in MVI, and maybe the whole team is not experienced in MVI. No one knows MVI at all. And so you see, when you bring someone like that into a team that they are not used to, maybe they're using like Uniflow, for instance, or unidirectional data flow. And so you see, they might be looking at you and thinking, why are you guys using this? So then I think also it starts affecting what is the kind of people that you'd want to join your team. Granted, they are more or less the same. Yes, people can easily pick them up. But I think you thinking about the architecture also is good, because it also can help people either reduce the time that it takes for them to develop their app, or if they are also struggling to understand what kind of architecture you guys are using, it can also create some form of like, drama when people are developing. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on the whole Android architecture. Yeah.
I mean, I think you summed up really well. Like, when you think about like which developer you want in your team, I think one that is not tied to a specific library or way of doing things, right? Because as you said, they change all the time. I mean, when I started Android, we had an MVC-ish thing, and then MVP came, and then Jetpack came, and like things will change, as you said. Like, and we got these unidirectional things that came more from the web part that people started playing with. Like back then, reactive Java, like reactive programming wasn't a thing, and now it's there. So things change, and I think I want this open mind on this. Like, it's good if you have the knowledge and you can maybe bring it into the team. Don't force it, especially if the developers don't know their thing. Because we always think like, I think a really good sentence a boss of mine once said, he said, I haven't had a single developer who joined the team who didn't say, we have to rewrite everything. And this is, I think, a very typical thing. We come into, oh wait, this is MVP. We have to go MVVM. We have to do it now. Like, I mean, no. Like,
yeah.
See how things working, and then if there's like a reason to bring something new in, try to convince people. Like, if there's actually a reason, but things will change, and yeah, it's good to have someone with new mindset into the team, right? Always from time to time. They will change things. Like, this is how we started using Kotlin and all of this. But yeah, be open-minded on both sides. Right? I think that's important.
Okay, cool, awesome. So that's it, guys. We just want to make it very short. If you want to learn more about, like, I think MV something, or more about Android architectural patterns, I mean, right now there's so many tutorials and lessons and guides, I think, about that out there, and probably even talks that people have given about this and blog posts. So I'll probably share a link on thoughts about it also. So yeah, that's it from us. So I think that's it for myself, and I think Danny needs to go and enjoy the last few minutes of summer before he goes to winter mode. So Danny, bye. See you in the next episode.
Yo, bye.